All right. First, let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this time together, Father. And I just pray for you to spark my memory, Father. Jar um, some um, very consequential and important events in my life, Father, to be spoken clear and concisely, all for the purpose of glorifying you, Lord, and in how I speak about you, Father. And I just pray that your Spirit invokes um, um, deep, dark things and things that are relevant to my life and how my life um, has been perpetuated and saved by your blood. So, Lord, I just pray uh, that you help me through this moment of time of being able to speak about myself, not to brag or boast or to top anybody else, Father, but all for your glory. May it be for you and you alone. In Jesus' name, amen. Turn my fan off. All right, so where shall I begin? I'll be like Taina, start from birth. um, so I was born by the name of Larry Clifford, and I was born in Bitburg, West Germany. West Germany obviously doesn't exist anymore, back in 1973. And Bitburg is kind of close to the Luxembourg border. And I was actually born on a Air Force base, but at the Bitburg Hospital right off a base. So my birth certificate is actually in German. It's pretty cool. So I had dual citizenship up until age 25, I think. And I've always said, like, if ever I got kicked out of the United States, I'll just like peace out, grab my German birth certificate and roll out to Germany. I got a place to stay over there. I did get to visit my birthplace for the very first time back in 2016, I think it was, when my wife and I went a trip to Germany through my insurance company. And it was just pretty amazing just to go over there and look around. The reason why I was in Bitburg, West Germany at the time I was born, I'm the son of a two-star general. My dad retired from the Air Force after 30 years of service from 1949 to 1979. My dad had a lot of accolades. My dad was the fourth African American, the fourth black ever to become general in the Air Force. There's only three that preceded him. Chappie James being the very first one, somebody I knew. And my dad's adopted brother, my uncle Chuck, became the seventh black general. He was a brigadier, a one-star general. And so what was awesome is my dad was also a fighter pilot. He flew F4s and F-103s, all kinds of fighter planes in the when they came out in the Korean War time and in the 60s, but he flew F4s in Vietnam. He was the first African American to be a test pilot for jet propulsion planes when they first came out. I forgot which one it was, T3 or F-86, whatever fighter was. So he was the very first one. Him and Chuck Yeager. You may or may not heard that name. He was the one that broke the sound barrier, but they came up at the same time. Matter of fact, when my dad worked in the Pentagon, Chuck Yeager was down the office or down the hall in an office, and um, so um, so coming from that pedigree, um, you have to understand obviously that somebody who achieves such high levels, he gives the glory to God. He just says, I was just in the right place at the right time. It wasn't anything that I had done special that he felt in his own mind. But obviously, God had given him some gifts and talents to be charismatic and to have the wherewithal to come up in a predominantly or mostly white armed forces in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And to come up in that, he always gave us the mantra that we as kids or black kids always had to work, or he always had to work twice as hard to get half as much as the white man next to him. That was his mantra. That's what he put into us. So we were always driven to do well, in school and sports and everything that we ever touched, to do well and to compete and be better than the ones next to us. And so even if we came home with straight A's, my dad would be like, well, can you get extra credit? There was always something. I mean, there wasn't any sense of, hey, great job, you've arrived. There was never a sense of arriving anywhere, because you were always striving for the next to to do good, to be in the position to be either promoted or to be in the position to, um, um, yeah, to further your career. Um, my brother, who was a year younger than I, were the only two from my mom and dad. But my mom had a previous marriage, so I have an older half brother with a different dad, and my dad had a previous marriage, so I have an older half sister who was adopted by his previous wife and himself. Um, and so, but my brother and I obviously were, we were raised together, so we did everything together. We were only a year and 2 days apart. He was also born in West Germany in the same city of Bitburg, Spangdahlem Air Force Base, and um, and so uh, we moved around when we were kids at different bases when we were small, all the way up until I think age 6, and then we finally settled in Detroit. And the reason why we were in Detroit is because my dad became the very first African American, very first black to be a executive, a plant manager for General Motors Corporation. Instead of him pursuing the 3rd star or 4th star as a general, General Motors gave him a big contract to get out. And he did. He took it. And so we were in the suburbs of Detroit. There was a Fleetwood Cadillac plant. So all the Cadillacs that you saw on the road in the 80s came out of my dad's plant, where he was the plant manager. And I even remember how many miles from the plant to the house was, because he can just get in a car. I think it was 40 miles from the plant to the house, because we look at the speedometer and see a brand new car off the lot or off the assembly line at our house. So I say all that to say, I guess the saying goes, I was raised with a silver spoon in my mouth. We were in a upper middle class suburb of Detroit called West Bloomfield. I went to private school, Detroit Country Day School in Bloomfield Hills, or Birmingham actually. And all the people around me were, now that I think back to it, it was an affluent Jewish community. I went to a lot of bar mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, because all my friends were Jewish. And we didn't want for anything. We played sports. I mean, I've been playing sports since I think kindergarten or 1st grade, soccer, and then always played sports all the way through college. And so we had a nice house, we had a nice place, went to private school. My dad afforded us all these different things, and I never knew what racism was. It wasn't, when you're kind of in the affluent community, it wasn't anything that was spoken about, because people were driven towards their careers and towards money and all these other things, and I guess it just didn't it didn't get passed down to the kids to be that they were racially different in any way. We were all taught to compete with one another. It didn't matter what race you were. If you were in this position next to me, then you were somebody to compete against. And so I didn't know anything about race. I didn't know actually that I was black until I moved to California halfway through my 9th grade year. We moved to Blythe, California, only because my dad was part of a black entrepreneurship program, where he was a class of the first African Americans out of General Motors to come out of entrepreneurship school, where they were giving, you learn how to run a dealership and then you purchase a dealership. And so my dad purchased a GM dealership in Blythe, California. So we moved from Detroit to Blythe. If you don't know where Blythe is a small, maybe 12 to 15,000 population desert town on the border of Arizona and California, right on the Colorado River. It's a podunk town. It's very poor, and it was a farm community. And obviously, my brother and I did well there. We were highly involved with sports and all these other things. And my dad's name was well known because he was the owner, the black owner of a car dealership, General Motors car dealership there. And so I didn't know I was black till I got to California, because I got to Blythe, because when I came to the school, all of a sudden people were standing in different sections. The blacks were here, the Mexicans were here, the skaters were over there, the stoners were over there, the nerdy the nerdy kids were over there. And one blessing for me was, and somebody had told me they always thought that I was a chameleon because I didn't know the difference or had labels or understood labels as labels were put on these people at that before I got there, was I was easily floated from one group to the other. I, was a straight A, graduated seventh in my class. I was a straight A student, student body vice president, quarterback of the football team for 3 years since I was a sophomore. So student athlete. I hung out with the blacks. I hung out with the Mexicans. I hung out with the nerdy crew. Didn't hang out with the stoners though. And and so I just kind of went from group to group without thinking about any type of divide. And after leaving the after leaving high school, after graduating, I went straight to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Had a congressional interview, grades and sports and everything else allowed me to get into one of the toughest schools, the military academies, West Point, Naval Academy, and then Air Force Academy, the toughest schools to qualify for and get into. So it was such a privilege. But I didn't know this. I guess I assumed I would get into it. I didn't even think twice. Like it was, for me, wasn't hard to get into. I came from the pedigree that I came from. I was driven to do well, and I just happened to do well at everything that I put my hands to. And so it wasn't a second thought, and I got into the school without a fight. Went into the Air Force Academy, went to the prep school, played sports, football and basketball my first year, and then I got onto the varsity football team my sophomore year. So I played Division I football there. And my sophomore year is where it all went downhill. I was on varsity. I was on set to follow maybe in my dad's footsteps. I did want to be a fighter pilot. My favorite movie was Top Gun growing up. I still to this day is my favorite movie. And maybe it was just going to fall in place and without even putting any attention to it. But that's not true. During my sophomore year at the Air Force Academy, I had a girlfriend who lived off base, and one of the times I went to her house to visit, I obtained a little .22 pistol, a little gun. It was an old one, not even, probably couldn't shoot like 3 feet, but I had it. I was a 20-year-old kid at the time, and I brought it stupidly to the base. Or you're not, if you're under the age of 21, you're not supposed to have any type of arms without registering it, all that stuff. So I brought it to my dorm room. I guess I thought it was cool. I put it in my lockbox, and I came back from football, go to football practice the next day. And after I came back from football practice, I had some upperclassmen and some directed by the commanding officer of our squadron to inspect my room, a surprise inspection. And so obviously they found a little pistol in there. And I said, how did you end up coming to search my room? And they said they heard there was an accusation that we had drugs and guns in our room or something like that. And so they found the pistol. Well, when I had to go see my commanding officer, he asked me whose it was. And the very first thing I did was lie, as I had often done in high school, to get out of things. And because of who I was and my name, I could get out of things all the time. Big fights going on, and I could be a part of it, but then talk my way out of it. So I was very good at getting out of sticky situations or potentially damaging situation. So I thought I could maybe do the same here. And so instantly I lied about it. And long story short on that one, after about 2 to 3 months of investigations of the lie that I told, I could see that my lie wasn't going to go through, and I tried to come back and tell the truth afterwards. Well, it was too late by then. I had to go see an honor board. The mantra at the Air Force Academy is that we will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate anyone amongst us who does. And despite my pedigree, despite where I came from, despite who my dad was and his connections in the Air Force, they recommended for me to be disenrolled. And so I only had one more board to go to, and which was the Commandant's Board, which is the final decision. But that wasn't going to be until a few weeks after you start your junior year, Well, after you start your junior year there, if you sign a letter of intent to stay and then you get kicked out, then you have to serve 5 years enlisted duty to serve out um, your service there. So I made a decision prior to signing that letter of intent to leave the Air Force Academy on my own. I called my dad and told him, and that was the first time I've ever heard my dad cry as he did over the phone. And I didn't know what to do with it. I was his firstborn, his blood, and a man who I held up at such a pedestal showed emotion that I didn't know how to handle. I left the Air Force Academy, transferred to UNLV in Las Vegas, tried to play football there, but I was on the tried to play, but I was a walk-on. I walked on the team, so I did make the team, but I didn't get any playing time. In Vegas then was where the downfall started, and I got into trying methamphetamines, and I'd always been a drinker since I was 15, hang out with the boys and drink, but got into methamphetamines, introduced to me by my girlfriend's cousin. And for the next 5 years, that methamphetamines took me from a 220 pound, 6'3", 220 pound athlete. I only had about 4% body fat on me at that time, and to a 6'3", 155 pound crackhead homeless on the street within a 4 or 5 year period. The first 3 years of that, I was a functional meth user. I had a job at a golf course. I was working, making money, and getting high. And eventually, the last couple of years of that declined to a point that I was homeless on the streets for the last year of that. It took me to a place that I never knew that I would ever go. And I forgot when. Well, take it back. So at the end of the 5 years, I ended up, my dad and my big brother came to Las Vegas while I was homeless on the streets, picked me up, dropped me off in my mom's house. I sobered up. After a year of being sober, I went back to finish my degree at UNLV in all things criminal justice in 2001. I thought to myself when I signed up for criminal justice that, hey, I've been on the streets. I could probably go undercover and help some DEA. And what's crazy is even after I got my degree in criminal justice in 2001, the concentration was forensic science, I actually did an interview with the DEA. And I might have had to lie on the application to say that I never used drugs, but I did do an interview and obviously didn't get the job. Didn't go for a second or third interview. And so that was in 2001 when I graduated. I got a job during that time. I did have a job at a nightclub, which is called the Rain Nightclub. It was the busiest nightclub in Las Vegas at the time because Real World Vegas was filmed there, and moved up pretty quickly to being a VIP host, from a bouncer to a VIP host. And towards the end of that employment, I had a lot of fun there. There were nights we were counting tips and everybody in the room was either high or drunk. Nobody spoke to each other, and we're trying to count money and put it into a pile. Like it was just crazy, and that was just normal. I think in my first week of work there, the boss got all those bouncers together at a bar and got double shots for everybody and told us if we didn't take this, we'd be fired. I'm like, oh, so this is how it is here. So that didn't play well into my addictive personality, and so it became something that we did nightly for the 4 years that I worked there. But towards the end of that, I had a roommate who was also my boss at work, that same place, who was a friend and boss at work. And he invited me one time to go to Hawaii. That's where he was from. And we were roommates at the time. I was living at his house or renting out one of his rooms. And he said, hey, Cliff, well, Larry then. Hey, Larry, hey, I'm going to go to Hawaii and I want to, do you want to roll out with me just after you get off of work? Pack a bag. I got the plane tickets paid for. We'll go for 5 days. We'll come back. We'll be at work the next week. And you don't have to do anything but get on the plane. Can't turn that down. And so I'd never been to Hawaii prior to that. And so we fly over to Kona on the Big Island. He shows me around. Well, come to find out that the whole reason that he was in Hawaii was because of the fact that he was the middleman of a drug deal that was supposed to happen. Money from LA was going to buy 5 or 6 keys of cocaine from Hawaii, and so he was the middleman because he knew the two parties. And so I found this out about 30 minutes prior to the crime being committed. His friend who had the money came over to our hotel room. My friend told me why he was there, and he dumps out 100, I don't remember what it was, $160,000 on the bed, all rolled up, and he's like, "Hey man, help me count this." And so I'm helping him count it, and because I've been around the drugs and alcohol and all those things before, I didn't even think twice about it. And so his job was to take the money that was part of the drug deal, go over to another hotel, do the exchange, and then bring the drugs back to his buddy from back in the day. And so, and all he said is, "Hey Larry, just roll with me, and we have some friends and some girls to go meet with afterwards. We'll have money in our pocket." Well, he'll have money in his pocket. I had nothing to do with it. He'll have money in his pocket. We'll have a good time for the rest of the week. So let's just go do this real quick. So anyways, we go to the other hotel. We go into the hotel. We go to the 4th level. I go out to the fire escape. I'm holding the bag of money because he asked me to carry it from the car to upstairs while he's perusing, looking around the joint, acting really skittish and scared. And so we get up to the top. He goes into the hotel room, which is about 10 doors down. I can see him down the hallway. He comes in, goes in. 2 minutes later, comes back out, comes to me. He says, "I don't feel good about this." And I said, "Hey man, let's roll out." I had nothing invested. "Let's just roll out. If you don't feel good, I know how that goes. If you got a bad feeling, let's just roll out. There's probably something bad going on." He's like, "No, I need to do this." So he grabs the money from in a bag that was between my legs on the ground. I'm sitting on the balcony smoking a cigarette. I see him go into the room. And as I see him go into the room, 2 minutes later, on the opposite room on the opposite side of the hallway, all I hear is, "Freeze, get down, DEA, FBI, get down." And I see guns and people running and rushing into the room that he just entered. I see a fire escape. I jet down the fire escape. There was 4 flights. I don't remember touching one of them. The adrenaline was so high. I'm running down the street. I was running actually to the Jeep because he gave me the keys and his phone. Maybe he knew something was up. And I thought I could just get in the Jeep and take off, but then I heard voices behind me, "Freeze, get down, FBI, DEA," whoever it was. "Get down, get down." And so I just continued to run. Well, if you've ever been to the Big Island has a road in the middle where the Ironman contest is that goes around a volcano and ocean on the other side. There's nowhere to go. So I'm running down the road. I get tired, I hide, and they come, they find me in the bushes and put a knee in my neck, and I was arrested. The charge that was given to me was aiding and abetting the distribution of cocaine, which carried with it a 5-year sentence. They recommended 24 months or 2 years incarceration and 3 years probation. I was sent off to, well, I had a year off on probation, but I violated that to where then they locked me up after being out on the streets for 10 months. And they sent me to Hawaii, where I was locked up for my first 4 or 5 months. It was in Hawaii that I am half black, half Filipino. It was in Hawaii. I get into a 2-man cell. All you have is your bunk bed, a little desk, and a toilet, and a little window that looked out to the airport so we can just see planes taking off and coming in, wishing we're on one of them. And I get into the cell, and a couple days later, after trying to settle in, my bunkmate underneath me, his name was Edmund Ferranda, Filipino guy, says, "I just wanted to wait a few days for you to get settled in, but I think you should read this." And he was trying to hand me a Bible. And I put my hands up. Being raised Roman Catholic, I thought I would burn for touching the Bible. That thing was hot, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I put my hands up, and I said, "Dude, I don't know what you're talking about." It was maybe a few weeks later or a week later, that I found myself, it was on my birthday, I found myself bawling. And no, I'm sorry. It was right before my birthday, a week before my birthday, and I was walking around the track. And then all of a sudden, they had inmate services. And one of the guys invited me into the inmate services and asked me if I wanted to, or wanted me to come into the service, which was a Spanish service. There was a Spanish pastor teaching the Spanish, but there was a Spanish guy that was translating into English. I go into the service, not just listening what's going on, and then they do an altar call, kind of like what Miles does through the interpreter. And I don't know what led me, but all of a sudden I got up, I went up to the altar call and gave my life to Christ in the Spanish service, where they just invited me to come in from outside. From that point on, Edmund Ferranda came back and wanted to give me a Bible again, and I grabbed it from him. I read it from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, from cover to cover in the next 30 to 60 days. 60 days to read it from cover to cover. I had plenty of time to do so. Read it from cover to cover. Then I got transferred out of Hawaii and ended up in Latuna, El Paso, Texas. The name of the facility is Latuna. And within a couple months there, and I had been reading the Bible. I was on my second round of reading through the Bible. And I was going to an inmate service where there was about 17 Christian guys meeting in the inmate church that was there. And there was a guy who was preaching who had been in prison for 13, 14 years. And I was just listening. I was coming to service every week for a couple months. Well, he got released. And right before he got released, for some reason, he was showing, God had led him to show me the church for some reason. So anyways, on the first day that he left, or the first service we had after he had left, one of the other elders of the church, one of the other inmates, asked if anybody had anything to share. Well, a few days before that, I received in the mail, it was called a letter from God. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where every line is a scripture, but it's written in a letter form. And it's basically a letter from God to you about accepting his son, Jesus Christ. And so I literally was sitting in a pew, and when he asked if anybody had anything to share, I just had this letter in my hand. I didn't have any intentions to share it. I just had it. And all of a sudden, I felt a push from behind me in the small of my back, as tangible and physical that I could possibly feel. So much so that I looked back behind me, but nobody was sitting there for a couple rows back. And nobody was directly behind me. And all of a sudden, I'm standing up, and then I look forward, and they say, Brother Cliff, you have something to share? And I said, yes. And so I went up, I shared the letter, and from every week from that moment on, I was given the responsibility to preach the word for the next 12 months. And in that time, every week from that point on, I guess I was then considered the leader of the church. The church had grown from 17 inmates, and by the time I left, we had 70 inmates. We had maybe one or two people playing a guitar when I got there, and then 12 months later, we had a full gospel band. There were instruments that weren't even used, but we found them somewhere, and the COs let us use those instruments, and we set up a full gospel band. We've been praying for probably the entire year of somebody coming in from the outside to be able to take over for the last guy that was teaching. And lo and behold, 3 weeks before I was released from prison, a pastor enters into one from outside, and I end up showing him around. 3 weeks I was released and left prison. I was released. I did my 2-year sentence in 16 months. I was let out early for good behavior, 17 months, something like that, 16 and a half, 17 months. And then my 3-year probation, I was released after 2 years. So I did about 3.5 years of my 5-year sentence. Right after I got out of prison, I felt one of my brothers in prison, Reggie, said, hey, Cliff. Oh, by this time, when I got to prison, I called myself Cliff. Whenever anybody asked me, hey, what was your name? I just said Cliff. I never used the Larry. It was Cliff from the moment I got into prison, not realizing that would be my Paul name, from Saul to Paul. So one of my boys, Reggie, said, hey, Cliff, if you're not pastoring by this time next year after you get out of here, there's something wrong. He gave me that word of encouragement. So I got out and I looked up seminaries, and there was about 4 or 5 in the San Diego area that I didn't know one from the other. And so I prayed to the Lord and asked him which one he wanted me to go to. And this was the first time that I heard his audible voice, and he told me where to go. And it was a distinct, stern whisper. So I went to Azusa Pacific University and graduated 4 years and graduated. Got my master's degree in 2011. One story I did miss while I was locked up in prison. About 8 months into being there, and I want to tell you, my wife will attest to this, I didn't want to leave prison. It was the healthiest I had been since I played football. We had a basketball league. I learned how to play guitar. We played ping pong. It was a low security facility. So it was basically a men's club. But I mean, I was so active in everything, preaching every week, lifting weights every morning, doing walks. Like I was in shape again. I was huge. I felt great. I didn't want to leave because I knew I would have to go back to the world and I didn't want to. But in that time, I think after 8 months, in that time, I remember one of our movie nights. It was on a Friday night. We had movie nights, and the movie that they had shown, and I can't think of the name. I think it was had to do with the Naval Academy. It was a boxing movie about the Naval Academy. A kid off the streets got recruited for a Naval Academy to be a boxer, and it was, I had some similarities of what I saw in that movie was similarities of how my life was at the academy, and so I got really downtrodden. I got so bad after watching that and just looking at my life and where I came from, where I thought I was supposed to go, but I wasn't pursuing it, but had this mindset that I was going to be fine in this world. And then looking at my current situation at that time, being locked up, being a disappointment to my family, being a disappointment to anybody who I went to school with who maybe thought I was going to be the successful, whatever it was. Just being a disappointment to the world. And I saw myself as not having a reason to live or a reason of being. There wasn't anything that I desired. Drugs took away my passion. And so I remember all I could think about after watching that movie and for that entire night and through the next morning was taking my own life. I wanted to die. I was going to kill myself. I had already heard a bunch of ways that people had died in prison, taking the sheets off your bed and tying it around your neck and then dangling yourself over to where your legs are behind you and you dangle so you can't catch yourself. And I've heard all these different ways that people had killed themselves, and those thoughts were in my mind to do so. And I was coming from breakfast. I didn't talk to anybody. I was walking it was like 1,000-foot walk from where we ate to where we slept. And I was walking along this field or along this yard. And that was my only thought. I was going to get back and kill myself. There was no ifs, ands, and buts about it. As I'm walking, I look to my left, and about 400 yards away, about 150 yards away on the other side of the double fence, barbed wire fence, there was a cross that was 30 feet in the air. And and it was a dark cross, and the way the sun shone from behind, I could see at an angle that there was a body on that cross. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it right now. And I looked and I saw it. It was 30 feet tall. It was above the fence. And the shadow of the body was on the cross. And a voice came over me and said, "Don't forget what I have done for you." And whenever I feel the Holy Spirit, it feels like to me an imaginary pitcher of warm water is poured over me. And then I feel this tangible feeling of warm water going down over top my body. And I just overwhelmingly snot cried basically as I'm walking back, and I started doing my steps little by little because I didn't want to get back to where the rest of the men were in the bunks area. And so I slowed up my walk, but I could see tangibly how real the cross of Christ was, and there was no mistake about it. And the voice that came over me, I heard in my head, there was no mistake about it. The emotions and how my body reacted to all of that I just saw, there was no mistake about it. That God was in that moment in which I was trying to do myself in. God was in that moment to save me from it. Because he knew what it was that he had for me, even though I couldn't see past that day. what he has had for me, obviously, and it doesn't go without some of the same thoughts that I had then, or doesn't go without the same struggles of understanding who I am and all these other things. But what he had for me was a wife, 3 beautiful children. My 4th had already been born at that time. He's 17 now. 3 beautiful children, a career, a family, a castle for a home, and a ministry to serve young adults since the Rock Church in 2016, 17, and other churches in between. And so he had all these things for me, unbeknownst to me. And I still struggle with, what am I supposed to be doing? And I still struggle with, is there more? Can I be doing more? Because I still was raised with, there's always, you can do better. And I live with this angst of, I can never be good enough. I live with this voice on my shoulder that tells me that you just got to keep going and do more and more and more. And I can never settle. So I'm an unsettled spirit. I'm tormented day and night with my lack of ability to achieve anything. People call me a jack of all trades. There's tons of things that I do, even at this particular moment. I mean, but I live with this. I live with this. I cannot arrive at anything. I can do a lot of small things good, but I don't feel like I'm in that one thing where I can settle and know that I'm where I need to be. It's an angst that I just can't get rid of, and it gives me the thoughts many times of, I just don't want to deal with those thoughts anymore. Now to a point of knowing what I know in the Word and in the Bible, seeing what God has prepared for me. Now it's a matter of, in my thoughts now, I struggle with the world and its contents. I've gotten to a point where it's hard for me to see good, because in and everything around me is evil or bad. Even my own thoughts, even my own ways of doing things. I can never be good enough, and therefore the world around me is even worse. And so I struggle with my thought patterns. I struggle with the world and my place in it. Knowing as much as I know through the Word, knowing as much as I know through how God has touched me and shown himself to me, I still struggle. I'll struggle into the moment that I arrive, but in my heart, I don't ever feel I will ever arrive. And it's a tough, painful struggle. So where do I go from here? All I lean on is the things that I just spoke about. When times get really rough, I can remember some things that God had done tangibly in my life to be able to pull me through and look forward to the next day to see what else is on the horizon. And so, so I hold on to those things so that I can get to the next day. And that's all I have, is him to pull me through. And so I'm thankful for that, because without that, there wouldn't be a tomorrow. And that's it. And so thank you for letting me share my testimony.